Not long ago, I was taken aback to discover that a major fire had occurred at Evertrust Company, where my spouse, Richard, is employed. It felt as though I had been hit with a sudden jolt. Consumed by worry, I immediately reached out to Richard, fervently praying for his safety. The phone rang, and when I finally heard his voice, an overwhelming sense of relief washed over me. Eagerly, I asked, "Richard, where are you? Are you okay?" My tone was louder than I had intended, a mix of anxiety and relief. However, Richard sounded irritated by my volume, replying curtly, "What's wrong with you? You're so loud." "I'm at work, don't call me when I'm working," before abruptly disconnecting. While he didn't appear to be directly affected by the fire, his dismissive reaction left me feeling unsettled. I'm Sarah, 35 years old, and nursing is a crucial aspect of my life. I married Richard 4 years ago when I was 30, just as I was approaching the end of my 20s. We met through a mutual friend and quickly developed a strong connection, leading to a joyful marriage. We currently reside in company housing provided by his job. 4 years in, we have yet to start a family, but I remain hopeful for a future filled with happiness alongside Richard. While he can sometimes be self-absorbed, he is generally a kind and caring person who makes me feel secure. Lately, though, he seems excessively focused on work, often bringing tasks home on his days off, which leaves him visibly drained. Richard's emotional distance affects our time together in the evenings. After dinner, he often lounges on the sofa, seemingly watching TV, but he's mostly preoccupied with his phone, using the television as mere background noise. Whenever I attempt to initiate a conversation, his responses are minimal, typically just a yeah or an oh, which makes me question whether I've upset him. This recent change in his demeanor is perplexing and worrisome. Wanting to believe that Richard is simply overwhelmed by his demanding job, I decided to do my part to lighten his load. If he was genuinely that tired, I thought it would be nice to ensure he had a warm lunch and a hearty dinner ready for him every day. I focused on making each meal nutritious and well-balanced to help him get through his long days. Then, an unexpected twist disrupted our routine. A colleague had called the day before, asking if I could switch my night shift for a day shift. This sudden change meant I'd be home in the evening, so I intended to let Richard know. However, amid the hustle of adjusting to the new shift, I only managed to send him an email about the switch on the actual day. I reassured him not to worry about dinner, as I'd take care of it once I returned home. Oddly, I didn't receive any response from him. Assuming he was busy at work, I focused on my responsibilities. Even after my shift ended, there was still no word from him. This was unusual, because Richard typically replies promptly to my texts during breaks, often using emojis to keep things lighthearted. But this time, he merely read my message without responding. I wondered if he was just swamped with work or if this lack of communication hinted at something more troubling, a shift that sometimes occurs after years of marriage. Feeling somewhat downhearted, I stopped by the supermarket on my way home. Despite the chilly weather, I was determined to prepare a warm one-pot meal for us. I gathered all the necessary ingredients and got everything ready to cook as soon as Richard walked through the door. However, he didn't arrive at his usual time of 6 p.m. Hours passed, and it was already 9 p.m. when he finally came home. As he entered, I greeted him, trying to keep the atmosphere light. "Hey there, you're home late. Did you have to work overtime?" I asked, my voice a blend of relief and concern, hoping for an easy explanation. "Yeah, but did you really have to switch to the day shift on short notice?" Richard asked as he stepped into the kitchen. Yes, a coworker had an emergency, and I didn't inform you about the change until late," I explained, sensing the tension growing between us. "I see, I suppose you couldn't help it," Richard replied, his voice tinged with annoyance. "But it's a bit frustrating that you only told me today. I could have made plans to grab a drink or something." "You're right, I'm sorry," I replied, turning on the stove to warm up the pot. "Oh, you haven't eaten yet," Richard remarked, noticing the meal I had prepared. "No, I thought I'd wait for you," I said, hoping he'd appreciate my gesture. "Well, thanks, but next time you don't have to wait for me," he said. His words stung. I had hoped for a cozy evening together. I let out a quiet sigh as I waited for the pot to boil. Once it started to simmer, I served Richard his portion, followed by mine. I was starving after waiting for him all evening. The hot pot was delicious, and I began to enjoy it, savoring each bite. Then I noticed Richard wasn't eating much. "What's the matter? You don't seem to be eating very much," I observed. "Oh, right," he mumbled, appearing distracted. He then admitted, "I worked late. and a junior colleague bought me a rice bowl at work, so I'm not hungry. Okay, but you could have told me that earlier, I said, feeling a mix of disappointment and irritation. I mean, you could have sent a quick message before I started cooking. I sensed Richard recognized my frustration because he quickly suggested, "All right then, just put all my portions in the fridge. I'll have it for breakfast tomorrow." He attempted to ease the tension, but the mood had already soured. After a few minutes of quiet, Richard stood up from the couch and abruptly declared, "I'm going for a walk." This was out of character. His sudden choice to leave after our conversation left me contemplating his recent behavior. When I voiced my worries about his need for a walk, Richard responded, "I haven't been exercising enough lately, and with all the late hours, I just need to clear my head." As he got ready to step outside, I felt a sense of emptiness sitting at the dining table with the hot pot still steaming before me. Eventually, I decided to store my meal in the fridge, feeling slightly bloated and realizing that we hadn't shared much quality time recently. I suggested I join him for a walk, hoping it could help us reconnect. However, Richard turned down my invitation, stating, "It's not good to move around right after eating. Besides, I need to walk alone tonight." With that, he left the house by himself. His actions struck me as peculiar, so I was compelled by instinct to discreetly follow him from afar. Despite the chilly evening, Richard walked with an unexpected energy. He eventually stopped near a park far from our home, appearing to wait for someone while frequently glancing at his phone. A few minutes later, a car pulled up. Richard approached and began chatting casually with the driver. Unable to resist, I edged closer for a better view through the car window. I caught sight of a woman with long, curly hair and glossy lipstick, laughing joyfully as Richard climbed into the passenger seat. The sight hit me hard, my mind raced with the thought that he might be having an affair. Just as I was processing what I saw, the car drove away with them inside. I stood there, stunned, struggling to understand what I had just witnessed. Shortly after, Richard texted me, claiming he had unexpectedly run into an acquaintance and would be home late. His explanation felt too convenient, and deep down, I sensed something was off. My trust in him was shaken as I grappled with the reality of the situation. He had claimed he wasn't hungry because he had already eaten, yet it was past 3 a.m. when Richard finally returned home. He stumbled in, seemingly tipsy, and headed straight for a glass of water in the kitchen, unaware that I was awake. Since that night, he often stayed late at work, particularly when I was on the day shift. Coordinating our days off had always been difficult, but now it felt nearly impossible. Recently, he not only worked late but also seemed to have plans on his supposed days off. I couldn't shake the feeling that he might be meeting the woman I had seen that night. Fueled by suspicion, I began searching online for detective agencies. After some digging, I submitted a request for an investigation to the most reputable one I could find. Guilt washed over me for sneaking around behind his back, but I rationalized that if the investigation proved him innocent, I could fully trust him again. The waiting for the results felt agonizing. Richard remained as distant as ever, and every time I looked at him, I was haunted by the image of that woman. I desperately sought clarity. Then an unexpected incident unfolded. It was a hectic Saturday at the hospital where I worked the day shift. Richard was supposedly working on his day off. As I focused on my responsibilities, trying to suppress my personal worries, the distant sound of fire truck sirens caught my ear. The noise grew louder and more frantic, and soon it was clear there were several fire trucks racing by. A sense of dread enveloped me, growing stronger as two of my colleagues returned to the ward with serious expressions. They were discussing an emergency, a large fire nearby. "Are you talking about the fire?" I asked, eager to catch up with their conversation. "Yes, that's right," they affirmed. There was a massive fire at Trust Company. At that moment, shock washed over me like a physical blow. Trust Company was Richard's workplace. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on me as I considered the potential danger he might be in. Realizing the fire was at Trust Company filled me with immediate fear. I quickly explained the situation to my colleagues and rushed to call Richard, hoping against hope that he was safe. Despite our recent tensions, I always saw him off each morning for work with a heavy heart. I dialed his number, fervently hoping he hadn't been caught in the fire. The phone rang until Richard's voice finally came through, momentarily lifting my spirits. "Hello, Richard, are you okay?" I asked, my voice rising louder than I intended, filled with relief, but instead of comfort, his response was short and irritated. "What's wrong with you? Why are you talking so loudly? I'm at work, don't call me during my shift," and then he abruptly hung up. Confusion and anger began to wash over me. A massive fire was raging, with fire trucks racing to the scene. It was hard to believe he was working normally under such conditions. His cold tone and strange response made me question whether he had actually gone to work or if something else was happening. As my concern for his safety morphed into suspicion about his loyalty, I recalled all those mornings I had seen him off. Was he using that time to meet someone else? By the time I got home, my decision was clear. I needed to leave and start fresh. As I began packing my things, I checked the mailbox and found the results from the detective agency waiting for me. It felt appropriate to take those with me as I left the house, which had ceased to feel like a home. My parents came to help me with the packing, and I arranged for a moving service to speed things along. In the midst of it all, I realized Richard likely had no idea I knew about his affairs, and he was probably with his mistress right then. I packed up my furniture and appliances that had been with me since my single days. The room quickly became a shell of its former self. As I stood there, surveying the nearly empty space, I recognized how much I had changed and how imperative it was for me to move on from this chapter of my life. I felt completely disconnected from the life I had led in that house. With determination, I moved my belongings to my parents' place and began searching for a new apartment to call my own. The next day, Richard finally called me. His voice was a mix of confusion and annoyance. "Hey, what's going on? Most of your stuff is gone." "I've moved out," I replied calmly. "What the hell were you thinking? When are you coming back? What about my meals? What about the chores?" His questions revealed his true priorities, solely focused on what I did for him. Hearing him speak like that left me stunned but not entirely shocked. "Is that all you think about when it comes to me?" I asked, disappointment heavy in my voice. Our conversation brought back memories of the fire at his company, a day he was supposedly busy at the office, yet he seemed too relaxed given the situation. "Why don't you just find another woman to do all that?" I shot back, unable to hold my composure. "What are you talking about?" he replied, genuinely bewildered. "You were with a woman named Kelly today, weren't you?" "Huh? What are you talking about? I was at the office." "Oh, at the office? How long did you actually work today?" I pressed, my suspicion escalating. "It was a hectic day, even though I was supposed to be off. I worked late into the evening," he insisted. "That's why I was so surprised you moved out," he added, trying to sound shocked by my actions. "Why don't you stop lying?" I countered sharply. "You weren't at work." "I wasn't lying, I was working." "What's going on?" His voice wavered between irritation and confusion. "How can you work late when there was a fire at your office during the day? When I called, multiple fire trucks were dispatched to your company to put out a blaze. I called to check if you were okay." "You told me not to call when you're at work," he exclaimed, as if there was no fire at all. His silence after that spoke volumes, confirming my suspicions. As the reality sank in deeper, the conversation laid bare the cracks in our relationship, making the distance between us more pronounced than ever. Armed with undeniable evidence from the detective agency, I had proof that left no room for denial. I informed him firmly, "You can't escape this. From now on, all communication goes through my lawyer." As expected, he begged for forgiveness, repeatedly apologizing for his betrayal, but my feelings for him had long since dissipated. "I'm sorry, but there's no way to fix this. I'm hanging up now," I said, cutting off any further attempts at reconciliation. I quickly met with my lawyer and requested a divorce and alimony. The process moved swiftly, thanks to the solid evidence I had gathered. The divorce was finalized, and both he and his coworker, his mistress, were ordered to pay a substantial sum in alimony. Their affair not only had personal consequences, but professional ones as well. Once news of their relationship spread, especially under the dramatic circumstances of the fire at his workplace, they faced widespread disdain among their colleagues. Both Richard and his affair partner received cold stares and harsh judgments, a social price for their actions that seemed to humiliate them deeply. Meanwhile, I moved into a new apartment and began to relish my independence. The stability of my nursing career allowed me to take things at my own pace without rushing into another relationship. I enjoyed my newfound solitude, appreciating the tranquility that came with it. Discovering my husband's affair, especially during the turmoil of the fire at his office, felt like a harsh twist of fate. Yet, in a way, it accelerated the inevitable. His actions brought about the consequences they deserved. Now, as I settled into my single life, I looked forward to the possibility of meeting someone genuine in the future, but without urgency, savoring each moment as it came. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you again in the next video. Stay amazed.